Good morning. Thank you for joining me. This is Jody Deegan, Training Accountability Coach with Nextstar Network. We're going to talk about tracking today. What are we tracking? And we've got a fairly small group today, so I would highly encourage participation. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and unmute, and I'll call on you and unmute your phone so that we can have an interactive conversation. So the more interaction we get, the more fun these are. So we'll get started. This is step 4 on the training accountability process. And for those of you that have been on the Nextstar website and have looked at the training accountability series, we have 9 or 10 steps that we go through on the training accountability series. And so step 4 talks about the metrics you're tracking. And we have coaching sessions based around those things. What are we actually tracking in your service center? And the reason that we do step 4 in the order that we do it within this sequence of the training accountability is we want to have data-driven conversations when we coach. And the metrics are a critical part of that so that we can actually have meaningful conversations instead of conversations that really come across as attacks. So let's jump into this. Peter Drucker, great business mind, said that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And we really live by that at Nextstar. We're all about tracking. And one of the most exciting things for me to see as a coach at Nextstar is when we get a new member in that is maybe not in tune with their numbers or various metrics as they should be. You know, they have an outside accountant that doesn't consistently give them their income statements, or we don't look at those income statements consistently. We don't know what our daily numbers, we don't have a budget. So one of the really exciting things for me as a coach is to witness that transformation where our members go from really not being dialed into what's going on in the business to really drilling down into having a really good grasp of what's happening on a daily basis. So what are the metrics that we want to take a look at? So why do we measure? And we all know that we need to measure things within our businesses. So I know this is pretty common sense, and so my purpose for this webinar is really to challenge your thinking on maybe what do we need to do a better job of measuring, or what are we measuring that we're really not using or is not relevant, or maybe it's not accurate. You know, so the point of this webinar is to really try to challenge your thinking a little bit, and let's look at things that we could do a little bit differently. So why do we measure? Well, first we need to identify what we need to train on. The metrics that we look at are a really good indicator of things that might be broken. You know, take conversion rate, for example. If we're looking at an HVAC technician, electrician, or a plumber, and we're looking at their conversion rate, we generally are going to consider that to be one of the most critical metrics that we look at. And as Keith Mercurio likes to say, if half of the customers that you saw were so unimpressed with you that they chose not to do business with you, that's a huge red flag. But if we're really not looking at our conversion rate and looking at that consistently within the business, that's a huge red flag. So it'll identify what do we need to train on. Are there training deficiencies? For example, if we're not getting the conversion rate, that's a pretty good indicator that we need to focus on the service system steps. Are we setting the agenda when we greet the customer? Are we presenting, the proper options on the summary of findings in the present step? So these are really great indicators for, hey, how do I fix this? The next thing, it'll identify the things we need to coach our employees to. Okay, so again, going back to conversion rate, not only do we want to have a weekly training process that addresses those, but when we sit down in our weekly one-on-one coaching sessions, we want to have meaningful dialogue about how we can correct this. How can we fix this? And those coaching conversations might involve assigning C1 videos or wake-up calls with them. It might be giving them deliverables like, this week I want to see a summary of findings on every single call that you go to, and next week let's sit down and let's review those and see what's going on and setting some goals. But if we don't have an accurate measurement of what's really going on there, you can't correct that behavior. And one of my grandsons belonged to a soccer team, and he didn't belong to it for very long, fortunately. I think one season, but there was no scoreboard, And of course, people like me that are business minded, that drives me absolutely crazy. Are we really? I know we don't want. It's not all about competition, but really, we're training and grooming our children at this age to learn about keeping score and why this is important. So you got to have some kind of a scoreboard to tell if we're winning. And in Nexstar, we one of the things that I really had to clean my filters on when I came to Nexstar some years ago, 5 years ago now. Um, I've always put performance boards in my training room. Everybody's stats, and Keith Mercurio really challenged my thinking on this, about having scoreboards in the business. Do they really motivate everybody? No, they really only motivate your top people. And so what we coach to is having a company scoreboard. Almost like a sports team. When you look at a team on the field and you're watching TV on Saturday, they're you don't see every individual player's numbers on that TV screen. You're seeing the team scores. You know, and so that's the number you really want to rally your team around. But the numbers that we're going to coach them to are the conversations we have in our one-on-one coaching sessions. Another reason why we measure is to identify trends that could be leading indicators of problems. So it's a really good leading indicator that maybe something is going south on you. Conversion rate, an average ticket, or our lead turnovers have suddenly started drying up to our comfort advisors. Well, why is that? We need to identify if there's a problem. But just like a dashboard on a car going down the road, if you don't have the information you need to make a corrective decision, you're not going to fix it in time. So being in tune with your numbers is a leading indicator of potential problems or potential training opportunities or coaching opportunities. It always goes back to training and coaching, right? Another reason is to evaluate the effectiveness of current processes or campaigns. So this is a much broader reaching program. It could even go back and affect marketing campaigns. If we've got a low conversion rate on a marketing campaign, maybe that's not an effective campaign for us. We're spending money, we're getting response, but at the end of the day, we're not able to convert those to money. So again, looking at that metric and really analyzing, hey, what is the effect of this program? Or maybe it's a process. Maybe we've got a process in place where we've got incentives in place that are actually discouraging tech turnover leads. Might be a good example of that. So my technician's incentivized on conversion rate, or maybe he's on his average ticket for repair work. Well, he knows that if he turns the lead over, that's going to torpedo that success, and he might be out of bonus contention. So that would be an example of a process that doesn't really support what we hope to achieve in the business. And do we have any thoughts or questions so far? If you have a question on your dashboard, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you, and would love to have that conversation. Linger there for just a moment. Okay, we'll move on. What do we measure? And the reason I picked this slide was I love Napoleon Dynamite, where he's jumping the bicycle. But when he watched Pedro jump the bicycle, he said, "Dude, you got like 6 feet of air." So it made me think of how often do we have employees or folks in our business that really confuse effort with results. We're doing this, we're working really hard, but at the end of the day, are we really achieving the results we're looking at? Or maybe we think we're doing better than we really are, you know? And this is something you really need to look at in a dispatch equation sometimes too. Our dispatchers might think that, oh, you know, Jimmy's such a great employee, he never gives me a hard time when I give him the late calls or anything. I'm just going to keep Jimmy fed. Well, the challenge there could be maybe Jimmy is not really doing a great job of turning those calls into opportunity, So we really need to look at what we're measuring. So I had some interesting conversations that really this week that challenged my thinking on what do we track. And one of the marketing coaches had sent out an email wondering if anyone had a member was inquiring, do we have an incentive plan for marketing managers? And I thought, that's an interesting question. I've never seen one for a marketing manager, but it got me to thinking, what would be some of the metrics that we would track for a marketing manager? If I were going to build an incentive plan for a marketing manager, it might be based on effectiveness of campaigns. It could be based on calls. It could be, tied to the conversion rate, the cost per lead. There could be a number of things there. So the point is, it really, don't look at what you've always looked at. Try to look outside the box and think about, what could I track? What can I track a little bit differently? Another example would be installation department. We talk and think in service. At least I do quite a bit, but really, we've got a lot of other departments within our business that could benefit from having some measurables, and we encourage that next. Every one of the business should know whether they won the day, and this always comes back to, um, do we know what our metrics are that are going to determine yes or no? Did I win the day today? So if I'm an installer, for example, what would be the metrics I'm looking at? Well, it could be, callbacks. It could be time efficiency of how long it took us to install that job. It could be a quality score. It could be a number of things. It could be a material percentage. Um, so those are the types of things we want to really try to think about, maybe a little bit outside of the box, or maybe something that is not a push button report on your business. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we had a few more folks join us here that might have missed the beginning. The point of this call is to really challenge your thinking about, what could we do a little bit differently in the metrics that we're measuring. You know, so think about things that maybe you're not measuring, or maybe your operating software, whether it be a Successware or Service Titan or Acowin or whatever, what do we really want to look at that might not be a push button report straight out of my operating system. In many of the businesses I ran, I generated my own operating report, and an operating report like that would typically, for one example, in a company I ran that was on Successware, I generated 9 reports every morning to populate the one operational report that I wanted to see, because I wanted to know how many recalls I had. I wanted to know how many lead turnovers I had on equipment over 10, and what was my conversion rate on calls under 10, and how many club percentages, and all these types of things. And I typically didn't get all those things from one report, so I would have to run several different reports and take different pieces from those to populate one great operational report. But the point is, really step back away from the pedestrian reports that you get out of your system and think about, what would I like to see or do a little bit differently? What do I really want to know? Okay. Because sometimes conversion rate won't tell you the whole story. So, okay. Now, do we have any thoughts or questions on that? We'll linger here for just a moment. Okay. And if you don't feel like answering the question, or if you're struggling with your control panel there a little bit, feel free to pop me an email afterwards, and we'll touch base. How do we measure? Okay, great question. So again, there are things that come out of our software that we might look at, but do we look at things a little bit differently? So how do we measure? Now, a lot of members are on software systems now that are putting out reports that they might not have 100% level of confidence in. So what I would challenge you to do is really take a look at those reports and question the accuracy of them, and figure out, what do I need to do to get the accurate reports? We have the coaching and tracking report. We're going to drill into that a little bit more in just a moment. But what are the steps that we need to do to measure? Okay. One of the metrics that I often coach members to use would be, what is our percentage of compliance for summary of findings? For example, if I had a technician that hit 20 calls this week, one of the metrics I would like to know is, hey, what percentage of those calls did you complete a summary of findings on? And I want to look at those summary of findings. I want to see those. I want to see that they were turned in. So there's probably not a report that's going to give you that data, because this would involve the technician turning those summary of findings in, somebody in the office tallying those up and saying, okay, Jimmy had 20 calls this week and he completed 20 summary of findings. Hey, love it, beautiful. Let's coach to those summaries. So that would be a metric that you're probably not going to see on an operating system, but it would be very effective for you to know because it's a good leading indicator of what's going to happen on those calls. Okay. So we need to look sometimes a little outside the box on how we're going to come up with the numbers that we do. And it's got to make sense. It's got to be cumbersome, but at the end of the day, you have to know the answers. This is an example of the new Nexstar coaching and tracking tool. I'm going to pull up a little bit bigger version here so I can blow this up. Okay. And for those of you that haven't seen this yet, business coach Jamie Robinson put a lot of work into building this out with the help of the other coaches. And this is the next generation of the traditional Nexstar coaching and tracking tool. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of detailed information time on this one today, but I wanted you to know that it exists. It's on the Nexstar website, and this is a great tool to look a little deeper than the old Nexstar tracking tool did. Okay, so we're just breaking out a little bit more detail on here. And again, the Nexstar coaching and tracking tool, the real benefit of this tool for those of you that may be on operating systems that give you a lot of this data, I think the biggest miss here is when somebody in the office populates this report and plugs it in. The real key to this success of this tool is that the technician in the field is filling out their daily timesheet and turning that in, and somebody takes their information and plugs it in. And the reason for that really critical difference there, we want our technicians in the field to own their numbers. If I'm an HVAC technician and I turn in my timesheet for the day and it says here's the hours I worked, here's how much time I was on the job, here are many hours I sold, I had 3 demand calls, I converted all 3 of those to money. I trust those numbers because I did this, I filled this out, I turned it in, and I know at the end of the day whether I had a good day or had a bad day. Did I win the day? So if the technician fills this out, he owns the number. He's got skin in the game, and that makes these numbers believable. And if they're believable, you're going to get more traction with these numbers when you coach to them. So that's the real benefit of the manual coaching and tracking system as we coach it. Okay. So what do we do with the data? Okay. So again, once we get the data, we need to coach to it. We're going to use this for meaningful sit-down coaching conversations, because we sit down with one of our employees and say, Jimmy, you really stunk it up this week. Man, you can't close the door. What's going on out there? That comes across like a verbal attack. It's not a positive conversation. But if you can sit down with one of your employees and say, the conversion rate fell to 63% this week, and the shop average is 87%. What are you finding out there? And how can I help you with this? Those are coaching conversations as opposed to attacks. But if you don't have the data from your report, from your dashboard, whatever the source, you can't have that data-driven coaching conversation. And again, we need to evaluate the training plan. Maybe we're training, but we've become like trail ride ponies. We're going through the motions. We don't have any fire. The guys show up at the meeting, they put in their time, and away they go. And it evaporates as soon as they walk out of your training room. So maybe that's a good indicator. Hey, we need to stir this up a little bit. We need to get back to the basics. Maybe I need to have a call with my TAP coach and figure out what I can do to make my meetings more interesting. Or do I have a training plan? The first thing we do in this TAP series is that we build an intentional training plan out for 1 quarter at a time, so that you have a really good, solid plan in place as to what you're going to tackle. Okay, so that's a critical piece of this. But if you're not getting the results, go back to your training plan. Maybe we're not having effective coaching or weekly meetings. Next, another thing this could identify is if you see discrepancies or deficiencies in your metrics, maybe it's a resource issue. We're looking at for example, a drain technician, and if he's got a low conversion rate, we're not getting cameras in the lines, then there's only 1 camera in the shop and it's broken. Well, that's a pretty good indicator that we've got a resource issue. We need to fix some cameras. We need to buy some new cameras. So sometimes the metrics are not necessarily a people deficiency, but it could be a material deficiency or a resource that we need to evaluate. Give them the tools to do their job and be successful. Another indicator, another result could be that we need to evaluate or create processes. Prior to coming to Nexstar 5 years ago, I worked for a very process-driven organization, and we had weekly management meetings, and we would evaluate the defects in the business. And we would typically walk out of every single weekly management meeting refining, defining, or writing new processes within the business. You know, so this this could be anything from how we did our paperwork to the way we close out work orders or the way we turn over a lead. Um, Everything was a defined process. But if we see something going backwards in our metrics, that's a pretty good indicator that a process isn't working, or maybe we need to update the process because technology or something in the business has changed the way that process works. Because processes are constantly changing. It's not a set it and forget it process. Okay. So creating the right process so that we get the correct results. And another indicator, hey, maybe this is another good indicator we need to adjust pricing. Um, and running your business throughout the course of the year is like death of a thousand cuts. Every single day, your margin dwindles a little bit. Fuel goes up just a little bit. Healthcare cost goes up just a little bit. Your cell phone bill goes up a little bit. Your software system, everything in your business goes up. And so if we're really not seeing the results we need out there, this really could be a pricing issue. Okay. The other thing that we're looking at there that could have a dramatic effect on your pricing is technician efficiency. So again, if we're seeing that the metrics are not where we want to get them, not where they should be, or not what our pricing is based on, and I'm referencing the profit pricer. The profit pricer is the tool that we use to determine is our pricing effective. But when we go back to when we start looking at our metrics, and if our pricing is built at 40% efficiency or 35% efficiency, and our technicians are, not operating at 35% efficient, they're operating at 28% efficiency, you're going to lose some money. So that's important that we look at that, we evaluate it, we go back to our profit pricer, plug in the new efficiency, and adjust our pricing accordingly. Otherwise, you're going to lose money. So you got to look at that data and make those corrections. Another thing that could affect that, maybe you lost some talent. Maybe you had a few heavy hitters that were really top tier technicians that really drove your efficiency rating higher, but now we've lost those guys. You got to go back and adjust your pricing, because if our efficiency has gone backwards at the loss of key manpower, we need to go back to our price book and make some corrections there. And this is the coaching log. So the coaching log is the tool that I share with members when we have our one-on-one calls about the one-on-one coaching. Now, the metrics that we've got in here are conversion rate, how many tasks per call, dollars per call, and sold hours to on-the-job time. And what I typically coach members with this tool is these metrics are straight out of the Nexstar coaching and tracking tool. But I also realize not all of our members are on those exact, not all of our members are coaching to sold hours. Some are still coaching to revenue or maybe other things. Or maybe your software is not giving you these things. I understand that. So what I recommend is change the metrics to get what you can coach to. Don't feel like you have to, if you're not able to get 2 of these 4 items, then you're just not paying attention to it because you can't track it. Then we need to change these metrics to what we can track. Okay. So now you have the stage. Are there any thoughts or questions that you would like to put out there and ask? All right. Quiet bunch this morning. All right. I try to keep this as brief as possible and to the point, but if I went too fast, or if you have further questions you'd like to address, feel free to reach out to me, Jody D at nexstarnetwork.com. Our next scheduled Tap In Live is Friday, February 15th. Brittany Spencer is going to host the Service Titan Dashboard. Brittany Spencer is an expert with Service Titan, used it for many years, and she's going to do a great piece about the Service Titan Dashboard and different metrics that you can pull out of that operating system. Thank you so much for joining me today. Have a fantastic weekend.